so much for joining. So the question that I'm going to be asking you is what you wish you could have learned when you were in school. And if you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself first and your book.
Okay. My name is Jody Sokolower, and I co-coordinate the Teach Palestine project here in California with Samia Shulman, who's a Palestinian educator here. And I grew up in Wheaton, Maryland, which in a school that it wasn't formally segregated, but, I was in school in the 50s and 60s, the 1950s and 60s. So in Maryland. So the school was tracked, and we were really affected by racism a lot. And as an adult, I've done lots of different things, but I did teach middle school and high school, and I was the managing editor for a magazine called Rethinking Schools that was about bringing social justice into classrooms. And now I co-coordinate this Teach Palestine project, and I just wrote a book called Determined to Stay: Palestinian Youth Fight for Their Village, which is about one village in Palestine called Silwan.
And what have you learned through this experience?
One thing is, I feel like when I went to school, what I learned were the myths, about Columbus discovering America, and that, that the United States is always getting better and better and better, and that everybody, if you just try hard and pull yourself up by the bootstraps, you can make it. And that I've spent my whole adult life trying to understand what is the history of the United States, what does that mean for me as a white person, and what kind of education do we need so that every generation as it comes along can help make the world a better place, can fight for can struggle for the United States to really be a place where everybody has freedom, that's really democratic, and that people can live their lives. And I think that silence about all different kinds of things is so destructive. Silence about what our history really is, silence about how many people are in prison, silence about, what it means when your family is, when there's harm or incest or substance abuse in your family, and you don't feel like you can share that with your peers at school or talk about it in class. So that's what I've learned, like that the whole world needs to be in the classroom, and we need to be able to talk to each other about it.
That's really well said. So now looking back, what would you have liked to have learned more about, or been able to have the opportunity to sit and really study?
Well, I know that I would have really wanted to understand what the history, like we talked about settlers, and settlers going into the West and Little House on the Prairie and all that stuff, but really understanding like what the people who lived here before settlers came, like what their lives were like and what it felt like to them to have the land, like their whole land and their connection to their ancestors and everything just like completely destroyed.
Right.
And, when I went to Palestine and started really understanding what it meant, that, the United States is a settler colony, and Palestine, Israel is a settler colony. They've stolen the land from the Palestinian people, just like we in the United States stole the land from Native Americans who lived here. And looking at both of those, like when you look at something that's similar but different, it really helps you understand. It really helps you understand both situations, and it also really helps you understand that, like, okay, we're all one world. We have to figure this stuff out, and
there's patterns in it for sure. There's patterns we do see. Now, in your book, Determined to Stay, it's very clear that you feel that it's important for our youth, particularly, to learn about what's happening in Palestine. Do you want to speak a little bit to that?
Sure. I think it's important for a lot of reasons. One is what I was just saying. It's like when you look at like so many youth today are struggling with either with criminalization of youth or just
Mm,
what the criminal justice system has meant for their families and their friends. That looking at like, well, why is that happening and how does that fit into racism in this country in general? And then if you look at Palestine, where there's
mm,
also this criminalization of youth, and it's so tied to trying to push Palestinians out of their neighborhoods. And
mm.
here it's tied to pushing people, kids of color and their families out of their neighborhoods. And so that's one reason. It's like, you know, one time we were teaching about Palestine in Santa Fe in New
Mm.
Mexico, and we were talking about water and how the Israelis have stolen the Palestinian aquifers and like what's happening with water in the West Bank, what's happening with water in Gaza.
Mm.
And one of the students there is from the Taos Pueblo, and they fought for generations to get the I think it's called the Blue Lake, their sacred water back.
Okay.
And at the end of the workshop, we were kind of evaluating. People were saying what they learned, what they thought, and he said, I'm gonna go home tonight and tell my family we're not the only people this ever happened to.
Mm.
And I think
Wow.
that sometimes when, when racism happens or other forms of oppression, it's so hard not to take it personally, to feel
Yeah.
like you should have done something, or if your family should have done something, or your community should have done something. And when you see it as a pattern, it takes you out of that like inflicting it on yourself and makes you just feel stronger. And so that's one reason. And another reason is there's so many lies, that Palestinians are terrorists, that Arabs are terrorists, that Israel is the country that wants peace. And that's not right,
Mm.
and Palestinians have tried so hard to explain who they are, how their land has been stolen, how their land has been more and more of their land and their houses are being stolen every day.
Mm.
And so that's another reason. And another reason is just that how creative their resistance is and how they're
Mm.
just like, we're not going to let them push us out. We're going to stay. And we're going to use hip hop. We're going to use murals. We're going to use dancing. We're going to use everything we can. And we're going
Yeah.
to bring up our kids to know their history and figure out how to shout it loud, and that's inspiring for all of us.
Absolutely. Why do you feel like this is such a sensitive topic for so many people?
Um, Well, I think that, people who think that Israel has a right to take Palestinian land and to expand as much as it wants are called Zionists.
Mm.
And that's the name of that belief that Jews have a right to Israel to that land as a homeland,
Mhm.
and that they can push other people off the land in order to do that. And I think that they've worked really hard to say, to demonize Palestinians and
Mm.
say that any criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. And anti-Semitism is prejudice against Jews for being Jewish. I'm Jewish. If you called me a name or said something nasty about my religion or my looks based on my heritage, that would be anti-Semitism. When the Germans wouldn't let Jews have certain jobs, they forced them to live in specific neighborhoods. When they killed millions of them, that's anti-Semitism. Criticizing the state of Israel for how it treats Palestinians, that's not anti-Semitism. And but I think that because people feel bad about what has happened to Jewish people at certain points in history,
Mm,
they feel um, they don't. Nobody wants to be accused of being anti-Semitic,
right.
and Zionists are very powerful. Like whenever you criticize Israel, or even if you use the word Palestine, they'll accuse you of being anti-Semitic.
So
And
they kind of intertwine religion with the other issues that are happening.
exactly. And this isn't about religion. It's not about identity. It's about land theft.
Right.
You know? So
And what about those that point to groups like Hamas or calling certain groups of Palestinians terrorists? How do you acknowledge that or counter that?
well, one thing is, I think that people who are, the United Nations says that if people are fighting against colonialism, they have a right to fight.
Mm,
And it's not up to other people to say um, how you should do it or how you shouldn't do it. And
mm,
it, you could have a discussion about what you think about Hamas's tactics or their strategy,
right.
but really, I think that's it's like a cover, that like
Mm,
it's an excuse because we're not talking about, oh, there are problems on each side. It's like Israel has stolen Palestine's land. And
right.
every day they're arresting people, they're suppressing them. They're stealing more and more land.
Yeah.
Gaza is an open air prison. It's completely surrounded by by fences and this huge wall. 98% of the water in Gaza is undrinkable. Um,
Mm,
that children in Gaza have lived through 4 or 5, these assaults, these bombing assaults that have like
mm,
totally destroyed the infrastructure of the country, oh,
right.
over and over and over again. So, talking about, what Hamas does to try to defend the people of Gaza, it's not really the point.
What do you think the ultimate fear is that people have if their children were to be taught explicitly about what's happening?
Well, that's interesting because look at all these people who are yelling, and now, they don't want any books they don't want kids learning about Black Lives Matter in school. They don't want them learning about structural racism in
Critical race
school.
theory. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the thing is, people say, oh, critical race theory, but like if you ask your students, like if your students go home and ask their families, like how they celebrate a holiday or how they stay in touch with what their history is,
Yep.
or that's critical race theory.
Yes.
It's like whenever you talk about what's the strength of your community and
Yeah.
how does that help you grow and become the kind of person you want to be, that's critical race theory. It's not
Yeah.
some abstract thing.
No.
So I think people want to hold on to their power. And I think,
Mm,
you know, I think there are a lot of white people in this country who are really scared because they don't want to have to share. They don't want to have to take responsibility for what they've done and what that means. But the thing is, if you stop trying to, you can't really be safe by building a wall. You can't really be safe by
mm,
building prisons. You
yeah.
can't be safe by, you know, building more and more bombs. You can only be safe by sharing and trying to have justice for everybody. So
Yeah.
if you want to be safe, you can't do that by trying to demonize other people. You have to do that by opening up your heart.
Yeah, which is probably harder for some people or scarier for some people to have
Yeah.
to do that, to really
Yeah.
let somebody in or let people, a group of people in. And you said you visited Palestine multiple times at this point, right?
Yep.
What were some things that surprised you in a positive way?
I love watching how Palestinians relate to their children. And I think that sometimes in the United States, parents are just like so busy with so many millions of things and they get really impatient and stuff. And I feel like Palestinians have such a deep sense of that the children are the future,
Mm,
and that just comes across on, there's so many ways that they can't protect their children from white settler violence, but kids just know that they're loved and respected. I feel like the
mm,
level of respect for children is just huge. Um,
nice.
and and just everyday resistance. Resistance means so many things in Palestine.
Mm,
It means refusing to move, even if your children have been arrested over and over and over again. It
mm,
means the lyrics of your hip hop. It means, learning how to do traditional embroidery from your own village,
yeah,
and everybody resists,
yeah.
in little ways and big ways. And that's really inspiring.
And now I know you mentioned that you're Jewish. So when writing your book or speaking to whether family members or other friends that are also Jewish, it's kind of like when Colin Kaepernick was, when he, during the national anthem, he took a knee,
Uh-huh.
and some people felt that those who supported him were anti-American. Did you ever experience anyone feeling like you were not really Jewish or not really supporting your faith by writing this book or by feeling the way that you do about Palestine?
Well, I don't know if it still exists, but this was a long time before I wrote my book. When I first started doing Palestine solidarity work, there was some email. There was like an something on the internet that was like self-hating Jews. This list of people who had ever taken a position in solidarity with Palestine, and
Okay.
and so I was on that list. So I guess that's some kind of honor.
Oh,
Um, but I mean, a lot of people who are Zionists say that. Nobody's
mm.
ever attacked me personally.
So I'm just going to read some of what I highlighted from your book. I highlighted so many things that just stood out to me. I know I know you obviously know what it is because you wrote it, but I'm going to read it for the audience. So it said, I decided to return to Silwan, interview teenagers and other members of the community, and write about the village. Palestine can seem so far away, and U.S. media makes it seem like the issues are too complicated to understand. Maybe I thought I can use the story of this one village to help make clear what's really going on. I wanted to write about Silwan as a way to help youth in the United States understand what is happening in Palestine and to demonstrate the connections it has to U.S. history and to what's happening in the United States today. Those connections are clear to many Palestinian youth. When demonstrations broke out in Ferguson, Missouri, over the 2014 killing of unarmed Michael Brown, the police responded with tear gas, nightsticks, and rubber bullets. Activists in Palestine were among the first to offer solidarity and suggestions, especially when they realized that the same tear gas canisters made in the United States were being used in both places. Solidarity with hashtag Ferguson tweeted Mariam Borgudi from the West Bank. Always make sure to run against the wind and to keep calm when you're tear gassed. The pain will pass. Don't rub your eyes. Rana Nuzzle tweeted hashtag Palestine knows what it means to be shot for your ethnicity. I thought that was so powerful.
You know, during the demonstrations around George Floyd's death, there's a part of the Israeli settlement wall, the security wall. It loops all through the city of Bethlehem, like cutting people, Palestinians off from their fields and their neighbors, their school, from the hospital. But
Mm,
it's become a site for a lot of murals. And
mm,
one of the the Palestinian artist there did a huge mural of George Floyd on the wall.
Yeah, which says so much. The fact that somebody all the way over there can empathize so strongly with what's happening here.
Yeah.
So I definitely feel personally there's a lot to be learned from your book and from these stories, and there's a lot of parallels. It's so interesting because even someone like me who's familiar with the area and with the issues at hand, after reading your book, it just drew the comparison so much more clearly. Like you tied it together really neatly, and it helped me understand it in a way that will then enable me to pay that forward, hopefully, in a way that's helpful.
Thank you.
I don't know if there's anything else that you wanted to share.
No, I'm so glad you're doing this.
Thank you. We're going to try and we're going to change the world, we hope.
That's the goal.
Always. It's always the goal. And we will be in touch regarding a potential webinar. I would love that. I'll send you an email.
Or a book group and just a discussion.
Oh, yes. A book group. That would be great.
Level would be great.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Keep in touch.
Take care. Have a great holiday.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.